Hi, Pete. So, we're going to delve into your mind cave, mind palace,
Wow.
and we were discussing the violence in your past. You seemed quite good at it, quite confident with it.
You talking to me?
I'm talking to you. So, we were discussing you now and you then.
When then?
When you were in the RAF, you were in a testosterone-filled barracks.
Right from the start.
Mm-hmm.
Full of at least 50% more, maybe more, of men from Belfast. Of both persuasions.
Right.
There was violence from the very start.
Do you mean Protestants and
I
right?
do mean that.
Oh God. Okay. So what they'd be fighting often over
All the time.
all the time, right? And what? How?
And
Like
that's
how?
when I learned of the divisions
Right.
in Northern Ireland. I'd been brought up in a colliery where the Catholics had a different school from the Protestants, me. I was never religious at all. But at break times, we would raid their school and pelt them with stones or anything free.
But it wasn't because of their religion. It was just because it was
They were cats, we were dogs.
right.
And they would do the same in return, except there was less of them. So I knew there was a difference, but Northern Ireland with bells on.
Right. So did you quickly figure that out?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was the fighting like? Was it quite atrocious, or did it get out of hand?
Yes.
Was anybody sort of sent to hospital, or?
I don't think anybody went to hospital because nobody would report it.
Right, okay. But they obviously knew that it went on.
Yeah.
And so the first time you saw this environment, I mean, obviously you had the situation with your school when you moved to the colliery, and that was quite a baptism of fire.
Yeah.
But then you step into this new challenge.
A cauldron. The snooker hall. What's that called?
The
It's like
snooker
a
hall?
cauldron. It'll come. The crucible. The crucible, which is like, I used to have one of these, a large metal, very heavy metal, with a long handle where you would melt metal in, and then you could transport it, put it in a mold. It's called a crucible. And this was concentrated crucible
Right.
in a billet of, say, 30 people, with bed, small locker, their locker, bed, repeated, all down on both sides.
Wow. And so when you got there, when did it dawn on you, or did it dawn on you that this was going to be something that you had to pay attention to and figure out and survive? Did you have that moment?
I knew from the first second, I have to survive this.
What happened?
I survived.
Of course. But was there anything that happened in that moment, or did you just feel it, or?
It was very easy to identify the hardest man. He's called Danny. He's from Belfast, Sandy Row, one of the hardest places in Belfast. He was Protestant, but it could have been the other way. And he ruled. And so, anybody got out of line, he stepped in.
And what was?
I was not from Ireland. Danny never bothered me. He could have, I guess. He was a real fighter. He didn't. I don't know why. I wasn't afraid of him.
Right.
He just did not bother me. And I carried that on for 18 months. I stayed in the same billet as Danny all the way through. And when I eventually got out, and I was in Civvy Street, and I was working with another man from Belfast, and he lived in Sandy Row. And he invited, I was in Stranraer and Port Patrick at the time, just a little ferry ride over to Belfast. So he invited me for a weekend to go back to Belfast. What an eye-opener. What an eye-opener. And this was the early days of the Reverend Ian Paisley coming to power. He's still quite a young man then, but a powerful orator. And there were Catholics working in Stranraer with us. This man, not Danny, he was still in the raft. One day, he went to the room of the Catholic lad and he took a razor to every bit of his clothing and just ribbons. That's the sort of thing that was happening.
Right.
So I went across to Belfast with him for that weekend. And we went, he lived not only in Sandy Row, and I won't mention the street, but the very heart of Protestantism in Belfast.
Right.
Horrible little hovel of a terrace street. And I mentioned this man Danny, who I'd been in the rock with. And his mother said his mother lives just 2 doors away. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
So I went down, introduced myself, asked about our son, Danny. Yeah. But he wasn't at home. He was in the raft somewhere. And I just said, remember, Pete came to visit.